Tucked away in a corner of one of Palma's busiest thoroughfares lies a railway station, almost hidden from view. The station belongs to a railway company called Ferrocarril de Sóller, literally the Iron Road of Sóller. And from here, up to 1 million passengers a year take the train from Palma to Sóller, a place often described as Mallorca's loveliest town, which is situated on the other side of the island. Almost all of these passengers are tourists. A trip on the railway is one of the most popular excursions on the island.
Touristic train?
Yes.
Right.
How many?
Dos.
One way or return?
Return.
Okay, thank you. 1 hour there, 1 hour back.
The railway company was founded in 1905. This was also the year that the predecessor of the modern Mallorcan Tourist Board was founded, in recognition of the growing importance of tourism to Mallorca's economy. Looking at the much photographed train, with its varnished teak carriages and gleaming brass fittings, you could be forgiven for thinking that the railway was built specifically for the tourist industry. Tourists and train enthusiasts alike watch with great interest as the locomotive is uncoupled and the train prepared for its return journey to Sóller. Everything seems to be done the old-fashioned way, and a trip on this railway really is a journey back in time. In fact, the railway was built by the people of Sóller as a last-ditch attempt to avoid economic decline and possible ruin. Tourism was the last thing on their minds. Sóller is situated on the northwest coast of the island of Mallorca. The town itself lies in a valley almost completely surrounded by the Tramuntana mountain range, which includes Puig Mayor. At 1,450 meters, it's Mallorca's highest mountain. The valley leads to the sea, and 5 kilometers away is the town's own port, Puerto de Sóller. For centuries, this geographical location contributed to the town's prosperity. The valley itself is one of the most fertile places on the island, and the mountains provide great shelter for the grapes, olives, and citrus fruit for which the town became famous. Louis XIV is said to have commanded that only oranges from Sóller could be served at Versailles. At the end of the 18th century, many French farmers, tradesmen, wine growers, and textile workers fled to Sóller from revolutionary France and set up export businesses here, shipping oranges back to the European mainland from the nearby port. But in the mid-19th century, the orange groves were devastated by plague, and many Sóller residents were forced to emigrate. Those that stayed behind looked to other industries, particularly textiles, to replace the trade in citrus fruit. At this point, the town's isolation from the rest of the island was no longer an advantage, but a major disadvantage. As the train creaks out of Palma station and begins its leisurely journey to Sóller, it's hard to imagine that more than a century ago, railways were at the cutting edge of transport technology. By the time this line opened, railways had been operating in Mallorca for 37 years, and the people of Sóller were determined to take advantage of the most modern form of transport available to them. The first part of the journey from Palma to Sóller is through the ever-expanding suburbs of Palma. At the Carrer Gaspar Benazar, the line veers left and heads north. Within a matter of minutes, the city is left behind. The first roads between Palma and Sóller were built in the mid-1800s, but understandably, given the mountainous terrain, they were little more than tracks. In 1895, a new road was opened, but the journey still took 4 hours, and the stagecoaches could only carry 12 passengers. Transporting oranges this way was very expensive, and next to impossible during the winter, the main time for harvesting the fruit. The people of Sóller looked on enviously as other parts of the island enjoyed the benefits of a railway connection to Palma. In 1892, a detailed study was drawn up which proposed a 48-kilometre route to run between Palma and the port of Sóller via Valdemosa and Dea. But the route called for numerous tunnels, steep inclines and hairpin curves and was simply too expensive. But the people of Sóller still wanted a railway, and so 12 years later they commissioned an engineer to come up with another plan. Señor Guerrao proposed a direct line between Palma and Sóller. At just over 27 kilometres, it was the shortest route between the two cities, but it required tunnelling through the mountains. A year later, in 1905, the Ferrocarril Palma to Sóller Company was formed. Nearly everyone in the town, from successful merchants to subsistence farmers, brought shares. The whole town wanted to own a piece of its railway. 7 years later, on the 12th of April 1912, the Sóller to Palma Railway was officially opened, with much pomp and ceremony. Huge crowds gathered at various points along the line, and the people of Sóller celebrated the fact that they had one of the finest new railways in the world. The opening of such a spectacular new railway might have made the news in places beyond Mallorca and the Spanish mainland, but on that day, the world's newspapers were just breaking news of an altogether different travel story: the sinking of the Titanic. 5 kilometers outside Palma is Son Sardina station, the first station along the route. Originally, a much grander 2-story station was planned for Son Sardina, but in the end, a single-story building was constructed and used by the station manager as a house. Now, the station's windows and doors have been bricked in, but the driver will stop here if you ask him. On leaving Son Sardina, the train crosses Mallorca's flat central plain and through fields of almond, olive and carob trees. Almond trees were introduced to the island soon after it was conquered by the Moors at the beginning of the 10th century. Now they outnumber all other types of tree on Mallorca. In the early spring, this part of the island is transformed by the mass of pinkish white blossom, and in the summer, the almonds are harvested by using long sticks to knock down the loosely attached nuts. The Mallorquins use almonds extensively in their cooking, but a real speciality is almond cake, with different variations found all over the island.
Ticket, carton, billete, caramelo.
The tall evergreen trees often found close to almond and olive trees are carob trees, which were also introduced by the Moors. The fruit turns a chocolate color as it ripens, and carob is probably best known as a chocolate and less often as a coffee substitute. Only eaten by humans in times of famine, the carob pods and seeds are used to feed livestock. The horn-shaped seeds are remarkably consistent in their weight, 0.18 of a gram, and for this reason they were long used as units of measurement for gold, silver and precious stones. The Greek word for horn is karation, and it is from this word that our word carat, used to describe gold and diamonds, is derived. So far, the journey has been relatively straight and virtually flat, but quite quickly, the landscape begins to change and becomes more rugged. The bluish grey of the mountains and olive groves fill the horizon, in contrast to the red earth of the tilled fields on the plain. Occasionally, in the distance between the tall pines which were planted to stop the embankments from eroding, you catch glimpses of the mountainous obstacles the railway engineers faced when they built the line. And as the train enters the first of many cuttings, a realization dawns that this was a very difficult line to build. An increasing number of terraces containing olive trees on either side of the track are an indication that the train is approaching Bunyola, a place traditionally associated with the harvesting of olives and the processing of their oil. Most of the olive groves here were planted in the 16th century. The dry, chalky soil of the Serra di Tramontana in this part of the island is particularly suitable for olive trees. Olive trees can live to be 1,500 years old, but the most productive are aged between 30 and 75. Their gnarled and deformed look is not natural. The trees are severely pruned and rotten bits are regularly cut out, and this produces the amazing shapes. Harvesting takes place at the end of November, when the olive trees are carefully thrashed or shaken. Nets are placed under the tree, and a fully grown tree produces about 40 kilograms or 20,000 olives. Very roughly, 5 kilos of olives are needed for each litre of oil, so each tree produces enough oil for about 8 1-litre bottles. Mallorca used to export a lot of its highly regarded olive oil, but apparently some bureaucrat in Brussels decided that the acidity of Mallorcan olives was too high and did not comply with the prescribed EU norm. Since then, olives have only been grown for local use and are not exported anymore. One last thing about olives. If you're given a dish of olives to eat, no matter how good they are, it's always good manners to leave one olive uneaten. Bunyola is 14 kilometers from Palma, just a little over halfway to Soller, and when the railway was built, it was an important town, known not just for its olives, but also for its production of quicklime and cement. The new railway line helped enormously with the transport of these commodities, but all that has gone, and Bunyola is now really a dormitory town, albeit an attractive one, for Palma. Still, the relative grandeur of the station is a reminder of Bunyola's importance a century ago. The first locomotives on the Palma-Soller Railway were powered by steam. 4 steam locomotives were bought by the company, each one named after a station along the route. But the arduous nature of the journey caused severe wear and tear and maintenance problems, and in 1929, just 17 years after the railway opened, the line was electrified. Fortunately, the original steam engines from this line found work on the other, flatter railways on the island. 4 motor coaches were commissioned from a company in Saragossa in Spain. The electric engines were manufactured by Siemens in Germany, and the trucks came from Philadelphia. Each coach weighs 33 tons, and the whole body and inner structure is made of wood. The motor coaches are bi-directional. Each has 2 control cabs. Each of them had first and third class compartments. First class passengers enjoyed, and still enjoy, comfy upholstered armchairs, while third class passengers enjoyed the view from slatted wooden seats. The opening of the newly electrified line was greeted as enthusiastically as the original opening of the railway had been, and 3/4 of a century later, these 4 engines are still in use. As locomotive number 4 pulls out of Bunyola and begins a long left-hand curve, the incline gets noticeably steeper, increasing to a grade of 2%. The construction of the track bed, 12 bridges and 13 tunnels, took 3 years and 1 month, just a couple of months more than the contractor's original estimate. By any measure, this was an incredible achievement. Just outside Bunyola, the train enters the first of 13 tunnels that lie between here and Soller, 13 kilometers away. This part of the island is the wettest, and the train passes nearby Alfabia and Raisha, 2 former Arabian estates with famous gardens. The color of Islam is green, a color of significance because anything green is a rare commodity in the desert. The color green is associated with the garden of God, a place of peace and refreshment, a place of shade where springs never run dry. The famous Moorish gardens at the Alcazar in Seville and the Alhambra in Granada were designed with this dream of paradise in mind, and the gardens at Alfabia and Raisha were designed along similar lines. As the train continues through this lush landscape, the Tramontana Mountains loom into view. Most people don't associate Mallorca with snow, but in the winter, the peaks of these mountains are often covered by it, and snow was collected here and compressed in special snow houses before being brought as ice by night in summer to consumers in Palma. Amazingly, this tough business continued until 1927, 13 years after this railway was opened. 3 kilometers outside Bunyola, and having passed through a number of embankments, cuttings and tunnels, the train enters the southern mouth of the Túnel Mayor, the biggest tunnel. The tunnel is barely wider than the train, creating the illusion that the train is traveling at great speed. In fact, it takes more than 4 minutes to travel just under 3 kilometers through the mountain. The noise of the train as it rattles through the tunnel is inescapable. The temperature drops dramatically, and the dim electric lights give this part of the journey an eerie feel. When the train emerges from the tunnel, it is at 210 meters above sea level, and the town of Soyer is just 3 kilometers away as the crow flies. But the station at Soyer is only 40 meters above sea level. So, in order to keep the incline of the track manageable, it was necessary to make the train travel a longer, circuitous route, which at times seems to cling perilously to the mountainside. The landscape here is dramatic, and the peaks of the Tramontana Mountains can be glimpsed through the pine trees. When the Soyer to Palma railway first opened, it carried about 150,000 passengers a year, but this number gradually declined. As the roads became better, both passengers and freight traffic moved away from the train, and the future looked bleak. But in the late 1950s, the start of the mass tourism boom, the number of passengers started to climb dramatically, with 400,000 carried each year on average in the 60s and 600,000 each year in the 70s and 80s. By the mid-1990s, more than 1 million passengers a year were traveling on the train, 7 times more than the amount when the service began. Tourism, an industry which few in Soyer had given any thought to when the railway was being planned, had saved the Soyer-Palma railway. A platform was built here at the Mirador des Pujols d'Espanya specifically for the tourists. Some trains stop here, allowing the passengers to get their first proper view of Soyer hundreds of feet below. The town's unique and spectacular situation is quite obvious when seen from here. Emerging from the 9th tunnel on the journey, the train crosses the Monreal's viaduct, an elegant, symmetrical structure whose 5 arches span the valley below. In front of an elegant farmhouse or finca, on the left of the track, orange and lemon trees appear for the first time, a sure sign that Sóller is getting closer. From the moment the train emerged from the Túnel Mayor to this point, Sóller has been on the right-hand side of the train, but the tunnel the train has just entered always succeeds in confusing first-time passengers. At 530 meters long, it's the second longest tunnel on the route, and while inside the mountain, the train makes a gentle, almost imperceptible 180-degree turn, so that when the train comes out at the other end of the tunnel, it's facing in the opposite direction, and Sóller now appears on the left-hand side of the train. This always causes some bewilderment. The name Sóller comes from the Arab word for gold and means golden valley or golden shell, depending on which translation you prefer. The valley is indeed scallop shell shaped, but the gold refers not to the oranges for which Sóller became famous, but to the olive oil produced in abundance here when the Moors ruled the island. One of the olive presses on the island, which keep the traditional method of oil production, is in Sóller. Candet has been a family business for the last 300 years. The train is, or at any rate was, known locally as Red Lightning, an odd name as it's neither red nor does it travel at lightning speed, taking an hour to travel 27 kilometers. Another nickname the train had was the Vitamin C Express. And while Express may be as affectionately inappropriate as lightning, the vitamin C part reflects the importance of oranges to Sóller's economy. Vitamin C and its benefits to human health were discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, and demand for the fruit increased. The new train enabled Sóller's most sought-after produce to be exported much more easily. The Portuguese introduced the sweet orange here in the early 1500s, and it's been grown in Sóller ever since. Mallorquins have hundreds of recipes for oranges. One of the nicest is a salad. Cut some peeled oranges into slices, arrange on a plate and season with salt, freshly milled white pepper, and a pinch of sugar. Chop some mint leaves and sprinkle them over the oranges and drizzle generously with olive oil. Leave in the fridge for at least half an hour before serving. Delicious. Oranges were responsible for Sóller's wealth and prosperity in the 18th and 19th centuries. And even when the orange plantations were decimated by pests in the 1860s, the fruit was responsible for Sóller's unique architecture. Those that stayed behind and stuck out the crisis became rich following the discovery of vitamin C and built themselves grand houses in the traditional Mallorcan style. Many of those forced to emigrate went to France, the Caribbean, and South America. When they returned, They needed to show that they too had made a success of their lives and built colonial palaces and Art Nouveau mansions. This mixture of very different architectural styles gives Sayre its unique and very attractive character. After just under an hour, the train passes between carriage sheds and workshops and pulls into Sayre station. For many passengers, their journey doesn't end here. A tram service operates between Sayre and Puerto de Sayre, 5 kilometers away. As soon as the train arrives, a tram leaves its shed and moves down to the Plaza España, right outside the station building. The train that has just arrived from Palma has to be got ready for its return journey to the capital. The station at Sayre was adapted from an early 17th century mansion, making this the oldest building in the world to be used as a railway station. The Art Nouveau additions to the original building make this an elegant place from which to watch the world go by. Sayre Station is also where all the maintenance, repairs and restoration works are carried out in a cluster of workshops and sheds near the entrance to the station. The 4 motor coaches used on the line are the original ones brought into service in 1929, as are these trucks and the electric motors which drive them. There's a carpentry shop where replacement fittings are made for the carriages, some of which date back to 1912, when the railway first opened. This is one of the original carriages from the tram and first came into service in 1913. As well as maintenance, there is much polishing and cleaning to be done, and the pride the staff have in their work is evident. Everything gleams. While the recently arrived train is prepared for its departure, many of its passengers from Palma are boarding the tram for the 25-minute journey to the port. Three rings on the bell, 2 sharp blows on the horn, and the Palma-bound train departs. By now, all its passengers are on board, and the tram sets off on its way to Puerto de Soller. The first part of the journey takes it down from the railway station and through a narrow street into the Plaza Constitución, Soller's main square. The square is dominated by the Church of San Bartolomé. Its modernist look is the work of one of Antoni Gaudi's pupils, Juan Rubió, who was responsible for the church's last major restoration, which started in 1904 and lasted 43 years. There has been a church on this site since 1236. The tram passes within touching distance of the tables and chairs belonging to the cafes which surround the square. For a little while, the tram shares the road with other cars and pedestrians as it passes some shops and the indoor market before joining its own right-of-way, which runs between the gardens and small holdings on either side of the track. The tram is owned and operated by the same company that owns the Soller-Palma Railway. It came into operation in 1913, a year after the main line opened, and much of the rolling stock used is original. Some of it is much more modern, a mere 50 years old. Leaving Soller behind, the tram crosses the road which connects Soller to its port and continues on its way to the sea. A few guidebooks say that the trams used on this line came from San Francisco, and there is a resemblance, but the truth is more prosaic. Some of them were commissioned from the same company in Spain that built the rolling stock for the Soller-Palma line, and some were bought second-hand from tram companies in Palma and Bilbao. Puerto de Soller, the port of Soller, is an almost perfectly shaped natural harbour, and was Soller's gateway to the world until the railway opened. Ships laden with oranges and passengers departed from here, as did the many emigrants who left when the orange crop failed in the 1860s. Now the port is home to a small fishing fleet, but it is primarily a very popular tourist destination, and as the tram travels around the edge of the harbour, it passes the many hotels, apartments and restaurants that look over the bay. The tram stops conveniently right outside the original station building, now a bar and restaurant. And while some of its passengers simply want to have a wander around the port, many of them head for the large passenger boats and continue their journey, this time by sea. The boats leave here for various places on the north coast of the island. Torrent de Pareis, Sa Calobra, Tuent, Cala Dea, Safaradada, and Sant Elm. And for many, a trip to one of these places is the reason they come to Puerto de Soller. For the tram, of course, there is no choice. You must turn around, go back to Soller, and meet the next group of expectant passengers off the train from Palma. "100 years after it came into being, the Ferrocarril de Soller still provides a great service. A trip on the railway is a wonderful experience and a journey back in time."